Members of the House, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth in our LitTalk series, In Conversation with Gavin Robinson. The Right Honourable Gavin Robinson MP is the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and the Member of Parliament for East Belfast. An alumni of Queen's University Belfast, he read law and attained a Masters in Irish politics before commencing practice as a barrister. Gavin was a member of Belfast City Council from 2010 until 2015, first for the Pollinger District electoral area and then for the newly created Titanic DEA. He served as the Lord Mayor of Belfast from June 2012 until June 2013, when his leadership was recognised during a difficult period for the city. Gavin was elected as the Member of Parliament for East Belfast in May 2015 and has since been re-elected in 2017, 2019 and 2024. He was elected as the Deputy Leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in June 2023 and in May 2024 he was ratified by the DUP Party Executive as Leader. Gavin, it is our pleasure to welcome you here to our society. I would like to pass it over to former head of Scoop, Claire Dickson HLM, to conduct the interview. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel, for opening. I just wanted to extend our thanks as a society to Gavin just again, because I think LitTalks are always a unique opportunity for students to directly hear from public representatives, so thank you very much, Gavin. Just want to start out by talking about sort of the early stages of your career. You started your career as a barrister and then entered politics in 2010. What kind of drew you away from being a barrister into politics, or what sort of inspired that move?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is my first time at any Literary Society event, so it's really nice to be with you. I spent more of my time in Students' Council. Whenever I was at Queen's and maybe the DUA, I got interested in politics at a younger age in university. I was 13 and my uncle, when he finished university, moved to America, so I was visiting him for the first time, and I was 13 years old in New York, and I thought, wow, what an amazing city. Hugely important global city with global reach and interest. America is such a world away from what I understood life to be like in East Belfast. And then home came on the news. And I grew up across the road from Stormont. My mum and dad still live there, but Stormont came on the news because it was Easter 1998. And so that sparked the initial interest. Not interest as if I knew what I was talking about, but just a fascination as to why home was being talked about on the streets of New York. So when I came back, it's really nerdy, but I wrote off to all the parties and I asked them like what's going on, and I still have responses from John Hume, and I still have responses from Ian Paisley and Bob McCartney and David Trimble, Monica McWilliams, and all the names that you might remember from that 1998 period. And there was obviously the referendum at that stage and then the elections, and that's what got me interested in politics at an early stage. And then I joined the DUP when I came to university. So though I became a barrister in 2008 and a councillor in 2010, and then focused on politics full time from 2011, the interest was there at a much earlier stage. And it developed and it grew. And with a lot of these things in life, when you start out pursuing an interest that you find rewarding, that you find responds in kind, then you keep on pursuing and you become more and more involved. So I had that funny period between 2010 and 2011 where I should have been doing a lot of legal work and I was spending more and more time in City Hall, and I was running from the bar library up and down to City Hall. It was about that time that my sister said, "You wear a barrister, you're now an embarrassment." No. You can always look to family for support, right? No matter what choices you make in life. So yeah, that was a fundamental turning point when I decided, right, I need to go at politics full time, and I got a chance to leave the bar and become a special advisor to the First Minister, and then never really looked back from there.
Yeah, and you've spoken throughout your career about your faith. Has that been kind of a defining part of your politics, or has that kind of guided you throughout your career? Can you give us a bit of an insight into that?
What's interesting, because you say I've spoken a lot, I don't think I do speak a lot about it.
Well, it's been referenced.
It's one of those things I don't speak a lot about, but yes, it does guide me. I mean, it's a part of me, but it's not something that I lecture or moralise others around, would be the way I look at it. So I'm guided personally, but I don't feel it's my need to tell everybody else over and above, positive encouragement, how you should think. And clearly, in political terms, our policies are grounded in a sense of understanding of the world and what's good for individuals and for society more generally, and for family, for supporting a strong unit within people. So you see that filter into our political policy, but you don't necessarily hear me talk about personal faith all that much. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's that's what you've picked up. So yeah, it is an important part of my life.
You've mentioned in previous interviews that your brother and sister have accused you of middle child syndrome. Do you agree with them?
Yeah, they're probably right.
In what way?
I sure love complaining. So there's always, I don't know if anyone else here has an older brother and a younger sister. And they used, my sister used to play us off, my brother and I, off one another. So if I fell out with her, she'd go to my big brother and get him to beat me up. And if he fell out with my sister, then she'd come to me and get me to try and up with my bigger brother. So that's the way we grew up. Now that we're a bit older, it's subsided a bit. Yeah, so my brother's 2 years older and sister's a year younger.
Very good.
So no, we've had one's involved in medicine, graduated through here and does plastic surgery. Doesn't practice on me. The benefit from her not. My sister works in marketing at QFM.
And you were one of the youngest Lord Mayors at City Council. During your time as Mayor, the Union Flags dispute erupted, and within your constituency of East Belfast, there were it was a part that was particularly troubled by that. You obviously voted against the proposal to limit the number of days the flag was flown at City Hall. Did that create any kind of difficulty for you in your constituency?
Well, it did, most surely. So I don't know, does anyone remember the flag protests? You do, back in 2012, so it's...
All quite
yeah, 14 years ago. And I was Lord Mayor. There had been a consultation going on for quite some time about flying of flags and the designation of flags. And the truth is, though it became a political issue and one that was vexed because it dealt with identity and it engaged identity. And it was really interesting that throughout the consultation, the vast majority of people in the city of Belfast couldn't have told you that there was a flag on City Hall, and most didn't notice it. But more particularly, nobody could have told you there was one on the top of the Ulster Hall. Because if you think about that walk down Bedford Street and you walk under a canopy at the front door, you wouldn't have seen it. It wasn't an imposition. It wasn't something that should have caused controversy. But it became really totemic. And so we knew how the votes were going to go. We knew it would be difficult. I was chairing the meeting, obviously, and if you remember, there was quite a lot of on-street discord that night whenever the vote trickled out into the streets. There was then an invasion in City Hall, and the back gates were broken down. Somebody who is now one of my Assembly colleagues in the party guldered from the public gallery, and I was, very stern as Lord Mayor, so I made sure I told him the silence in the gallery, no shouting in here, and then they bleated, "They're in the effing car park." At which point we had to suspend the meeting. And the reason I say that it was difficult because some of you guys will be interested in politics, some of you because you're studying it, and some of you because you just have an interest more generally in society, and you'll learn about 1998 and the agreement, and you'll learn about consociationalism, and you'll learn about the structures that we have and the hunt mechanism and trying to bring various communities together with community protections and so on. And no matter how hard that process of getting government in Northern Ireland was in 1998, what happened in 2012 with the flag protest showed you that identity matters. And even though you can settle structures and you can settle the theory and the theology of how to govern, when you start scratching at the surface, there are symbols and items and aspects of life that people attach themselves to, are not only socially but psychologically and emotionally attached to, and the removal of that flag struck a really negative tone, discord within my community particularly, but not just people that voted DUP. There were quite a number of people who would never vote for us, who would see themselves softer in their constitutional position, more enlightened in their social position, but they actually felt that it was an unnecessary thing and it was something that caused them great consternation. And so in my constituency, as Daniel mentioned, it was Pottinger DEA and then Titanic DEA, bottom of the Newton Arch Road, bottom of the Woodstock Road, bottom of the Albert Bridge Road. There was a lot of trouble, and as a councillor I needed to engage with and understand and try to prevent attacks that happened in Short Strand, for example, at that time. So there was a weekly protest in City Hall in Belfast. There's a parade from East Belfast into the City Hall every week, and on the way home homes were getting stoned and windows were getting smashed in Short Strand. That's not okay. That's not what you want to see. And actually, whilst I'm indicating to you that the vast majority of people thought it was an unnecessary decision that caused disproportionate and unnecessary discord within community and community relations, as soon as violence started, that wider level of support fell away. The vast majority of people in Northern Ireland have never supported violence, don't support violence, don't believe in violence. And I remember there was one occasion in Monkstown, there were protests right across Northern Ireland at this time. There was one occasion in Monkstown where this elderly gentleman who was in his late 70s was trying to get into White Abbey Hospital to see his wife who'd been in hospital for weeks, and he was distraught, and flag protesters were telling him, "You're not getting past, we've blocked the road because of the flag." And this 78-year-old started crying to say, "I want to see my wife. Whatever about the flag, I still want to go and see my wife who's dying." And those sort of things then turned off the larger share of the population who felt actually that whilst the decision was unnecessary, they didn't support actions like that. And you see that quite repetitively. The two things I would mention about it from a more general political perspective. The first is, and I've mentioned, that it was unnecessary. And I remember one of my colleagues asked, a senior Sinn Féin member at the time, "Why did you do that? Why did you think it was a good thing to do?" And the response was, "It's good to put a saddle on a bear." So unionism was larger. Unionism was in a stronger position at the time, but the Sinn Féin view was, put a saddle on a bear, you'll see it agitated. You'll see it stamp and snarl and show the worst side of it. And so they were quite happy and relaxed for that to be the outcome. In the same way that you take an untamed stallion and you would try to ride it like a show pony, it's not going to react well, it's going to buck in the first instance. And I thought that was indicative of the mentality. And the second thing, and it relates to the first, is that in 2011 and in 2012, our political leaders within unionism and republicanism were working really well in Northern Ireland. They had taken the decision to share power from 2007. They continued that. They went to the election in 2011 and they both increased in seats and percentage share of the vote because they were pragmatically and enthusiastically working for everyone in Northern Ireland and for their own reasons, working to make Northern Ireland work. And that all changed whenever the vote took place in December 2012. And the engaging of some of those identity issues and the unnecessary poking your neighbour in the eye had a material impact on the ability for political leaders to govern together well. And since then you've had a decade of discord in politics, which I think has generally not been to our collective benefit.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick with your constituency of East Belfast. You've outpolled Alliance leader Naomi Long in the past 4 general elections, but it's been a close battle at times, with your majority being 1800 in 2019.
Typical BBC.
Have you seen East Belfast change over the past number of years?
I've certainly seen no humility in the political commentary around my head.
Well, have you seen it change in any way, become maybe more pluralist? Have you kind of adapted your politics at all to kind of suit that in any way?
It's interesting. I mean, it's a good question. and I am teasing you. I'm teasing you in your professionalism and your integrity, but I'll tell you this, in every election I've fought, in the 4 elections I was told I would lose by commentators who seem to know more about my community than I do.
And did that cause you to shift at all or anything? Or
no, it causes me to go back. So, like
how did you go about then contesting the election kind of off the back of that?
Tall tell you, and then the 5th time it will not work out so well. Look, the truth is, because I was like a councillor in Pottinger and then Titanic, lower part of East Belfast. East Belfast is a very wide and diverse place. East Belfast holds, areas of social deprivation in the lower part. So we have, the inner east, as it's called. The outer east tends to be folks that moved from the inner east in the 70s and 80s out to Dundonald, and would be more, there's working class areas and there's middle class areas, lower middle class, and then there's the leafy suburbs in the middle east. So we have the inner east, the outer east and the middle east, and the Belmonts and the Ballyhackamores and the Shandons, and so there are diverse communities within East Belfast. It's not one homogenous place.
Yeah.
But that's not a new thing that emerged in 2010 whenever the vote split 3 ways and Alliance won. That was so true in 1979 whenever the UP first won the seat and held it for 31 years, where there were 63 votes between Peter Robinson winning and Oliver Napier missing out, and Bill Craig at the time, the sitting Unionist councillor, losing, or MP losing. So it was a 3-way split in 79. It became a 3-way split again in 2010. And in 2015, with Unionist cooperation, I was the only Unionist candidate. In 2017, there was a whole host of other Unionists, and actually my majority went from 2,500 to 8,500. You didn't mention that.
Still closing the test. Point still stands.
And then in 2019, full Unionist field, but only one, the Ulster Unionist stood, Alliance and myself. So there was only 3 candidates on the ballot. You had other constituencies in Northern Ireland where you had 18, 19 people standing. In East Belfast there were 3. And what you found was there was an alternative Unionist vote, and then there was a coalition to try and get rid of me. It didn't work. Didn't work. And what I would say is that in each of those elections you'll see that of almost 50%, in one of them 56%, but always sitting around the 50% of the vote. So when people talk about first past the post, you can get elected on 32%. Yes, the SDLP did get elected on 32% in South Belfast, the lowest share of any seat in the whole of the United Kingdom in that election. In 2015, that wasn't the case in East.
An up-and-coming...
She's bored of that now.
An up-and-coming sports club in East Belfast is East Belfast GAA, which is fairly new in the scene, I believe. Have you ever been to a match?
No.
Why?
What?
Why?
I haven't been invited. I have no particular interest in GAA. I have been to Casement Park. That helps. I did a throw-in. Does anybody know what GAA? No, I did the throw-in at Casement Park. I was probably the last person to do the throw-in at Casement Park. So, yes.
You intend to do that?
I have engaged with, right? Here's the truth. I have engaged with them. I have given them support each and every time that they've had incidents at the bench, and I don't think it can be supported or tolerated, and I know somebody's now in jail for a lot of the sectarian activity against them, and rightly so. I also know that from my engagement with them, meetings that I've had, that they actually didn't want to become part of a political story. They're interested in sport. So I can tell you that from their chair and their secretary and so on, at the moment, they struggle because they have people from the Alliance Party, the SDLP and Sinn Féin all vying to be the best supporters of East Belfast GAA that there can be, all trying to outdo one another, all play tricks and games to be seen as the best, most full-throated supporter for them. They don't want to be a part of that political nonsense. So I don't go and superficially stand at the side, understanding absolutely nothing about what's going on, to try and make myself look good, to assuage some weird suggestion that because you don't go, it's in some way politically disrespectful. So that's the answer.
Just going to move on to the subject of unionist realignment, which is obviously something that seems to come up again and again. I wonder how far you agree with Mike Nesbitt's proposal that the best way to align, to split kind of unionism into two factions would be a party for progressive unionism and a party for the more traditional sense. Do you think that would be the most effective way to do that?
No.
Why?
I think it's madness because it involves splitting the DUP in two. And we are by far the largest unionist party in votes, in seats, in percentage share. And yes, we do talk about cooperation, not because it's a wheeze or not because it's a new thing. We've been engaged in unionist cooperation since our inception. We were engaged in unionist cooperation in the run-up and post-Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1986 and 87. We lost some of our senior members at the time because we did agreements around unionist cooperation then. We had unionist cooperation around my seat, and in 2015 we've had unionist cooperation to get Tom Elliott elected in Fermanagh South Tyrone in 2015. There has been examples of unionist cooperation for years, and why does it keep coming up? Because it's what our people ask us. It's what our people ask us, and it's what they would like to see. And they know that division costs. We can say very clearly, I can sit here and rhyme off all the statistics around what happened in the 2022 election. Unionism lost a seat in North Antrim because of divisions within unionism. Unionism lost a seat in Strangford because of divisions within unionism. There is one less unionist sitting around the executive table because of divisions within unionism. And so when the people that we represent say would like to see you get your act together to talk to one another and cooperate, that doesn't mean that we all have to be the same. That doesn't mean that that we just are totally devoid of difference, or that people shouldn't have a choice, but that there are some things that are more important than others. And for most unionists, it's protecting Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. And so personality clashes and individual discord really shouldn't get in the way of the primary objective of anybody who believes in Northern Ireland's place within the UK.
So if you say you believe in giving unionists choice, how far do you agree cooperation should go, or what does that look like for you?
Well, I've always said it's not for me to completely determine what it should be, and I think Mike's idea, interesting in though as it is never going to, nobody's going to succeed in building trust and attaining cooperation if they have that discussion externally. If they go out and try to have a level of engagement without having the courtesy to talk to the individuals that would be involved in those discussions. So I don't colour in the page at this stage. I don't think it's productive to colour in the page at this stage. I wrote to John Burrows and I asked him to engage in discussions. I got a response last Friday. I'll be sitting down with him and we'll see what his true intention is, because so far it's quite normal for anybody to show a level of ambition, but so far he hasn't really told all his colleagues that they're going to be joined by about 3 candidates in each constituency alongside them, whenever most of them struggle to get elected as a sole candidate. But at the moment he wants to lead the Ulster Unionist Party to be the largest party in Northern Ireland by the next election, so they'll have to stand an awful lot more candidates. So he's been filling in a bit of his colour, continuing the attacks and so on, as he does. But I'll engage with him in the next week or two, and we'll just see whether he has an interest. Similar as I've had discussions with Jim Allister and with Russell Watton, who leads the PUP as well.
Throughout last year, successive LitTalk polling showed support for the 4 executive parties slipping, and at one stage the TUV enjoyed a substantial rise, at one point being only 4 points behind yourselves. You talk about unionist cooperation. Could that be seen as a form of self-interest due to a threat from your smaller rivals?
Well, I think that's why I tried to give you a contextual position of cooperation for us is not a new thing. Cooperation for us was something that saw unionism maximised in the 2015 election. Cooperation from us saw unionism maximised as far back as 1987. I'm a beneficiary of unionist cooperation. This is not about us over anybody else. This is about the collective view of unionism and a response to the collective desire of the people we represent. So I hear people saying, oh, you're only talking about it now because you see rise in the polls. Look, you see those polls? They're a wonderful, self-selected group of individuals like me. I fill them in. Right? It's all politically engaged nerds fill in the LitTalk polls. It's not the real world.
They would argue differently.
Oh, I know. I've heard them try to argue black as white for a long time. But they have who else is on the panel? You're on the panel? Put your hand up if you're on the LitTalk panel.
I feel
Come on, Jack, you need to be on 6 times. You can have multiple, by the way. You don't have to just do the one, right? It's a total nonsense. And the only thing that ever comes true about LitTalk polls is the closer you get to an election, the more realistic they become. Because they get thoroughly. Look, they've had me losing his Belfast every time. Did you not? Right? Didn't work out well. So
maybe you listened and came back fighting to the poll. Or it was
That's it.
Talks.
That's it. So look, polls. The truth is, no matter how self-selected and nerdy and so on it is, it can show you, because the same flaws are there every time they do this poll. It can show you interesting trends. And as you can see, we've gone up in the last number of polls, others have gone down. Collective unionism is where it was. And since 1998, in actual polls, election polls, collective nationalism hasn't moved one bit. It was 39% collective nationalism in 1998, it's 39% today. So there are reasons to be cheerful.
People often speak of unionism as being a broad church. Do you think naturally, it exists in 3 parties, and there are people who may be uncomfortable if there were, say, for example, electoral pacts being done to actually vote for a particular unionist candidate, that they wouldn't feel represented their views, if that kind of choice shrunk?
So every party is a broad church.
But it's even less broad.
Every party is a broad church, and the truth is that for some historical or family or traditional reason, you could have people who are tub-thumping red, white and blue in each of the 4 unionist parties. You could have somebody who's as liberal and wishy-washy in each of the 4 unionist parties for a whole myriad of reasons. The Ulster-Unionists used to always joke, had a discussion earlier about left-wing unionism. Fred Cobain was always Red Fred. And in the DUP, that was Sammy Wilson. Right? People don't see it now, but back then it was true. Sammy Wilson was our Red Fred. There were socialists involved in the DUP, socialists involved in the Ulster Unionists, socialists involved in the PUP more particularly, but there were also some folks to the right in the PUP, which was a socialist party. So unionism is broad, nationalism is broad. Don't forget, 10 years ago, Sinn Féin were anti-Europe. There are still members of Sinn Féin who are anti-Europe. There are still members of Sinn Féin who thought they were right to oppose the Lisbon Treaty and the Nice Treaty. Still members of Sinn Féin who think that the Green Book of their associate organisation was right to be anti-EU because they didn't believe in this bastion of corporate wonder. And then there are others who obviously won out the day. Fox hunting was mentioned earlier by. There's a fella at the front here and he cosplays as a Tory gent.
It's definitely true.
He's in his casuals tonight. Disappointed, I thought there'd be a dicky bow. but fox hunting's another classic example. Where do you put that on the political compass? Where do you put fox hunting as a pursuit? Is it to the right? Is it to the left? Is it only landed gentry? Is it a staple of conservation and countryside management to the left? And you will find that within Sinn Féin there'll be as many people support fox hunting as there are in the DUP. You have parties to the right and the left. So there's broad churches and all of these things. Your question really is one about choice. And should it be for me and John Burrows and Jim Allister to decide who your representatives are? Well, the choice is for everybody. The first choice they have is, do they walk to the polling station or do they not? Do they bother to vote? And then when you go into a polling station, your always next choice is, who best represents my views. Not who represents all of my views. Anybody who tells you that there's one party that represents everything they believe is a liar. And that includes me saying that as the leader of the DUP. Everybody finds compromises. You have to. You have to find a vehicle which is more likely to advance the vast majority of things that you're interested in. And you take the rough with the smooth. But the biggest issue for the Unionist electorate more particularly is cooperation. And that's encouraging all of us to work together to further the core objective, irrespective of individual policy nuance differences, the core objective, which is to see Northern Ireland's place within the UK maintained and strengthened.
Which brings me very nicely on to the next question, which was really that at its core unionism is about basically advocating for maintaining Northern Ireland's place in the Union. Often in the headlines we see long NHS waiting lists, we see the education budget in difficulty, we see periods where Stormont is suspended. How do you kind of propose to advocate for, more of the same when, those stats are on the table and people are watching the news every night and that's coming up? How do you propose to tell them we want more of this? We want Northern Ireland to remain in the Union?
Well, I do. Even if you don't, right? I do, because I am delighted to be a part of the sixth largest economy in the world. I am delighted to be a part of a country that has a material and positive impact in the world through its position in the P5 nations of the United Nations, through its position in the Five Eyes, through its position in NATO, through the influence that it has throughout the world in the Commonwealth, the positive influence that it's had on our legal system throughout the world, the positive influence that it's had on human rights throughout the world. I'm delighted that we live in a country which benefits from the defence security of our country, doesn't pretend to engage in some sort of independence or neutrality while secretly sitting under the protective blanket that the UK provides, like the Irish Republic do. They sit and pretend. They come up here and throw a few shackles around and talk about shared island fund and think it's wonderful in the last 5 years and it's full of £1 billion. Woo! That's great. Instead of the side of £17 billion it's given them on top of the money produced in this country every year from the United Kingdom, I know which one I would take. I know what economic support I would take. The Irish Republic had to take a bailout from the United Kingdom back in 2010 because they were bust. Seem to forget that pretty quick. They threw 50 grand into doing nurse training provision in Magee. Now, who pays for Magee? We do, and our country does. Who pays for the delivery of public services? We do, and our country does. And they're not being subvented by anybody else. We have economic, social, political, defence ties across the United Kingdom, historical ties, associations with institutions and associations with individual families that span one part of our nation to all four parts of our nation and our Commonwealth. That's a positive thing, and I'll keep talking about it positively.
That doesn't take away though from the fact that there are issues at Stormont and there are issues that Northern Ireland faces with regards to public services, and I'm wondering if you agree that that might make people constitutionally curious when they look at that, when they look at the negative side.
Show me one democracy where people don't say there are challenges. Show me one democracy where people don't get frustrated with the lack of service delivery or the ability to do better. Go to the United States. Wonderful demonstration of collegiality, I think not. They're past themselves.
Different though, perhaps, in a deeply divided society.
Is it?
Where there are nationalists and unionists and those people in between.
Is it?
I do. I believe.
I don't understand why people say that. This is
because there's more debate, and there's Ireland's future, and there's. So I'm just wondering whether
bring
you
that
think.
Bell, she's only
whether that brings that debate along a bit, and people begin to talk because they're not happy maybe about the economic issues and the social issues that they're faced with.
So you're saying that, right? And that's the position that you want to portray because it shows you a level of advancement to something else. And it shows you momentum for a political aspiration you have. But I'm asking, does it? Because in 2016, I can't shy away from or deny that there was turmoil around the decision to leave the European Union. There was. It's inescapable. But I can tell you firmly that all the nonsense that was spoken, all the nonsense that was said, that the decision to leave the European Union was going to hasten the demise for unionists, was going to remove Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom, was going to encourage people to change their constitutional outlook because they couldn't live without being a part of the European Union. And it's rubbish, because since 1998 to today, the combined vote of nationalism has not changed one bit.
So, you're putting that to me as a fact. Did it spark the debate? Is more my question, on the conversation,
Aye,
the dialogue surrounding it.
But we were told 10 years ago it sparked the debate.
So you don't feel it's
There's
moved
no
on
material change at all in that 10-year period. None. Now, I know that doesn't suit the narrative of people that want to demonstrate some level of momentum, but it isn't real. It's not right. I could give you by excruciating detail every frailty in the UK political system and Keir Starmer and the basket case economics that his government brings forward, and their failed aspirations that they sold to the people 2 years ago, and the 17 U-turns that he's been engaged in, and even the dictatorial cancellation of council elections that he's had to reverse today in court, right? But I could similarly sit here and tell you about the failed endeavours in the Irish Republic. I could tell you about the excruciating housing waiting lists in the Irish Republic, the inability of any young person to see themselves owning a home in the Irish Republic, the desperate situation that parts of their health service face in the Irish Republic, the fact that the country talks globally all the time about international relations, and then they talk about their neutrality and they do nothing. They will talk about it, but they will take no action whatsoever. And I'll highlight 2 Sinn Féin MEPs who didn't even have the guts to vote for the European Union's contribution to the security effort in Ukraine. It's a shame. But you'll find every system in the world has its negativities. But I'll not change from the positive portrayal of where we are, what we benefit from a greater collective arrangement within the United Kingdom, within the United Nations, within NATO, within the Five Eyes, within the Commonwealth, and all the positivity, historical, social, economic and cultural bonds that brings.
I think we've exhausted that one. But you did mention the Brexit word, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but now you've done it. The UK boss of Talis, which employs about 1,000 people in Northern Ireland, not sure whether you heard it, but they told the BBC on Friday that the UK has almost no choice but to form closer ties with Europe. So that was Phil Suter. He said it's vital for both geopolitical and funding reasons and to create readiness. I'm wondering how far you go with his comments, considering obviously the impact of jobs in your constituency.
Do you know they tried to get me on to talk about this and even extra on Friday? Did you know that?
Sure.
You probably put in the request.
Oh, no, I know it.
Yeah. So very interestingly, you always have people, like during the referendum, by the way, in East Belfast voted to leave. But during that referendum, we were told that all these defence companies were going to leave East Belfast if we voted to leave. They're still here.
So it doesn't concern you?
That's the first thing. The second thing is that the day after the vote, Thales Alenia Space was launched by the head of the European Space Agency. This is the very day after we voted to leave. The head of the European Space Agency launched Thales Alenia Space in my constituency in East Belfast. Right? It does not surprise me that a company which is European and a company that has engaged in very successful work on their space program and their electric propulsion for satellites, right? It doesn't surprise me at all that some comments like that would be made. Secondly, and politically, it doesn't concern me at all either. And if I'd gone on to Evening Extra, I would have told you this too. It doesn't concern me, and for this reason. My view, irrespective of what was intended or the potential that could have been delivered in 2016, it hasn't been. It hasn't been because of a failure of the political system in London to deliver for Northern Ireland. And our position, despite what our detractors say, was not to pursue the hardest form of Brexit available. That's not what we did. In fact, we abstained on a number of votes that would have seen the United Kingdom leave the political structures but retain relationships on customs and single market. We abstained in those for the very good reason that whilst it mightn't be the best form of Brexit, it certainly wouldn't harm Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. And it's often forgotten. So what he is talking about there, and the local guys, Nigel Vane and so on, what they are talking about in business terms is greater cooperation, collaboration, and potential closer alignment. So I'm not against that. I'm not against the UK taking decisions as a whole that help us in Northern Ireland, because what I can tell you is the situation that we've been left in outrageously is not as good as it could be.
So you agree in part with what it is?
I'm not concerned by what he said.
I'm going to finish just on an executive question. There seems to have been allegations swirling around that the environment is toxic and there's some tensions. Do you have faith that this executive will last?
So I think it should. I know I wish it to. And the allegations about the executive becoming toxic are probably my fault. Because I asked my colleagues to return to Stormont in September. We met in August, and I asked them to return in September with a bang. And I asked them not to shy away from speaking out and standing up for the things we believe in. And that seemed to put people off, and it seemed to put their backs up, and seemed to leave folks saying, oh gosh, it's all got very toxic. And it's not toxic actually. All it is asking people to stand up for the policies that we stand for and to speak out on the issues that matter for us. And so, a political system should have the ability to absorb and facilitate robust debate, like you and I have. Right? And if you and I can leave this table as friends, then
The executive can stand.
The executive can stand. Is that fair? But it is actually, but it genuinely is my fault, because I asked colleagues to go in and make sure that they came back with a bang. And from your what do you call it? Lucid talk, bogus talk poll, it has worked. It's gone up. But no, there's no. Let me tell you, I mentioned about 98, and I mentioned about how my interest in politics was sparked. I can also tell you that during the Brexit years, during the 2017 to 2019 Parliament, was the time in my life when I crystallised most profoundly the importance of Stormont. Stormont was down at that time. We were going through a fundamentally difficult period in our politics. Questions around our constitutional future were being raised. Though they didn't materialise in subsequent elections, they were being raised. It was a difficult time, and Stormont was down, and the SDLP had lost all of their seats at Westminster. So I realised that this was a dangerous period of time for me as a unionist, because my nationalist neighbours that I have to share this place with had no ability to shape their own future or have a say in how they are governed or in the place that I want them to continue to call home in the United Kingdom. And that's what Stormont provides. Stormont provides the opportunity for people who have vastly different constitutional outlooks to be involved and participate in and shape their own future. And so I attach a fundamental importance to Stormont more than some others within unionism, because I've seen what life was like when it was down, and the constitutional questions were most profound. Nationalism had no valve for their views, couldn't shape their future, and the only person that was saying anything vaguely supportive of where they were was Sylvia Herman at that time in Parliament. So I see a profound importance to devolution that goes much beyond delivering just for what I want, but also allows some of my neighbours who share a completely different view to at least have their say and shape their future in Northern Ireland.
Well, I believe I have to let other people ask questions now, but thank you very much.
I'll spread the love.
So, just hands up really, and whoever wants. Yeah, hand at the back there.
Hello. I sort of have two simple questions. So, firstly, are you a Christian? And secondly, why should Christians vote for your party?
So yes, I am. And secondly, well, you can vote for whoever floats your boat. Right? In an election, you have the opportunity to choose. And in an election, you have the opportunity to choose people who closely align to your values and those that don't. But I can tell you that whether it's issues around faith in schools and the decisions that Paul Given has taken, particularly around RE and the assemblies in schools, can you imagine what it would be like under devolution? Or if devolution wasn't there, can you imagine what it would be like if it was Keir Starmer making those decisions? I can tell you from my faith-based perspective, I wouldn't like to see the outcome, but I am pleased that I have a colleague who I appoint and keep in that role, who's guided by something more than political polls and is prepared to push back against some of the agendas that we see. Others talk about it as common sense. So when it goes into gender, goes into family life, goes into some of the wider societal issues that we face, not just in Northern Ireland, across the country, I can tell you that from my perspective, I'm happy that I not only lead, but vote for a party that I know uphold and share the same values.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Go with Ryan.
So in your answer to the last question from Claire, you talked about the importance of Stormont, and when Stormont's down, it's damaging for unionism or for people's sense of Northern Ireland being their home in other communities in the other community in Northern Ireland. Recently, there's been a bit of discussion about reform of the institutions, and some of the messaging that I've seen from the DUP seems to be quite sceptical of that because of concerns that it would erode cross-community protections. I think that from polling that I've seen, most people in Northern Ireland think that the Belfast Agreement is the best form, the best option for governing Northern Ireland, but it needs to be reformed. And I think, worryingly, as someone who is a unionist, I think that the long-term strategy for Sinn Féin could quite possibly be call time on the institutions. I've already seen some stuff in the press about saying that the 2027 Assembly election will be the last. So basically my question is, is there any reform of the institutions that the DUP would support, or do you just want to keep the same structures that we have at the moment?
The DUP has reformed Stormont. We've been involved in discussions that saw reform not only to the number of departments but to the number of assembly members. We've seen reforms on a whole host of issues. But what you find in this discussion is that most parties will say that you can't change anything unless you only change the bits that we're interested in. Right? That's not a good way to progress. And secondly, and it is very important, the cross-community protections at the heart of our system were important in '98 and are important today. And we will not countenance a situation where anybody suggests that they only had protections whilst they were a minority, but now that they see or believe that unionism is in a minority, we should do away with it. And the worst thing about it all is that sometimes within journalism, sometimes it creeps into wider society, people talk about mutual veto and deadlock and lack of progress. And actually what you need doesn't matter really what system you have, doesn't matter how you reform this or change that. What you need are willing participants. Because if you have willing participants who are happy to work pragmatically and move things on, then you will find compromise. And the necessity to have support from the two largest communities within Northern Ireland on an equal basis encourages consensus and compromise, and people to talk and understand where the other might be coming from and find a way through. And those are values that are important, but all too often we only ever consider mechanisms that are there and the protections that are there through a negative prism, because they're presented more often in a negative way. It shouldn't be that way. I don't believe in. I also, and I've said this on many occasions, you get folks in politics in Northern Ireland who talk about a shared future. What they mean is they're prepared to offer people a future if you share their view. That doesn't work. And it certainly doesn't work in a scenario where they might remove community protections, either way. So I have colleagues that sit on the Assembly and Executive Review Committee. I have colleagues who engage in these discussions. We are a party that have engaged in reform in the past, but we'll only do it if it works, not some superficial tease or squeeze, which is to try and remove the idea of consensus building in Northern Ireland, because that won't work for any of us in the long run. Thank you for the question.
Yeah,
with the fresh version of the T-block strategy coming soon, especially with the executive office, what role do you think the DUP can play in relations between the positively growing ethnic minorities and the traditional communities in Northern Ireland?
Well, I hope we already do. Encourage and foster and support the people within our community. I don't know what this refreshed T-Buck strategy is going to say. I'm not in the executive, thank goodness. And I'll leave my colleagues in the party who are to explain to you some of the intricacies. But Northern Ireland, having individuals in our communities and constituencies that are different from me is not a new thing. The largest non-Indigenous population in Northern Ireland from the 50s until the 70s was the Chinese population, and that continued, though it was supplemented, and we have a strong Indian community in Belfast particularly. Some Commonwealth countries in the early 90s, in my constituency, quite a number of Congolese refugees because of difficulties that were being experienced in Africa at the time, and then post-2007 accession countries and the European movement. And immigration is not a problem in and of itself. I think all of us, and you can see it in a national context, can consider not only some of the issues around uncontrolled immigration or immigration which is irregular or that breaches the rules. It's disrespectful to those who come here legally and want to make a contribution to our community. It's also disrespectful to the lion's share of local communities where issues are already accentuated whenever they become host to individuals that are waiting to have asylum claims determined and so on. And so I can see the difficulties with that too. And when I hear people in Northern Ireland talk, and particularly it gets thrown at us all the time, but there isn't an issue in Northern Ireland because the numbers are so small and so on. I can point to House of Commons figures from 2023 when Belfast as a council area, and more particularly some of the areas in the inner city of Belfast, was second highest in the whole of the United Kingdom for applicants waiting to have applications determined. Haringey Council was the highest for anybody that's interested, but Northern Ireland, Belfast City Council was the second highest in the whole of the UK, which I just think is interesting. But what can we do? I go to Mila. Politically as a leader, I will never shy away from condemning the worst things that I see around violence and intimidation. There's a class little church on the Albert Bridge Road that I engage with, and it's Brazilian based, and they run a food bank and they're really supportive of the community, and yet somebody took an angle grinder to the shutter and tried to burn the place down. Well, I was there. And I was there with them not only in the immediate aftermath when the place was still full of smoke, I was there then the next week when they invited the community in again to see what they do. So there are practical things that leaders can do on a very individual basis. There are supportive and totemic things that leaders can do, and more fundamentally, together building a united community should give the opportunity, I would have thought from a resource and a structural government perspective, to make sure that we accentuate the positives, and it's not all a negative story led by more nationalist headlines. And I say national headlines rather than nationalist headlines.
We'll go with James then.
In my home constituency of Foyle, Gary Middleton narrowly crossed the line through transfers from into an Irish Republican Party, and it can be assumed that it was his pro-life views that probably got him across there. Does the party have any interest in engaging with perhaps practicing Catholics or those who might be more socially conservative in that regard? And how would you balance that when the party, for example yourself posting the Parachute Regiment flag on Twitter, and then of course Gregory Campbell's comments Of course, the parachute regiment killing 2 Protestants on the Shankill a few months later after Bloody Sunday. How does the party balance that between staving off the more hardline TUV, but also perhaps trying to get some votes from socially conservative Catholics?
Well, I'm not interested in staving off anybody. Right? I stand on my own 2 feet. And I support the armed forces. I support the parachute regiment. I'll not apologise for that today or any other day. And
But you'd condemn the murders of Protestant civilians on the Shankill?
I condemn murders of anybody, and I did indicate to you earlier that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland do not support violence. Why were the armed forces in Northern Ireland? To protect peace and to stop this place falling into anarchy because of terrorism. People talk to me about how many deaths may be associated with the parachute regiment. How many members of the parachute regiment were murdered in Northern Ireland?
I wouldn't know.
You see? I mean, I only say that because very often people will say, oh, do you know how many were killed on Bloody Sunday? Do you know how many killed with Shankill? And when I say killed, right, that's not the same as murder. Terrorists can do nothing but murder because they're only there to break the law. That's what their intent is, that's what their heart is. They're there to destroy peace, destroy our society and break the law. But I think there were 56 members of the parachute regiment were murdered by terrorists in Northern Ireland, sent here, young men, sent here to protect us from ourselves. So I don't say that to stave off anything from anybody. I say that because I believe it. Secondly, I say very clearly, and by the way, and this is not directed at you, right? It's your home city. But I did interviews 6 months ago about an army jobs fair being cancelled in Londonderry. Right? And a number of interviews I gave, do you know what the journalist said? But sure, you have to understand, it's Londonderry. Or you have to understand, it's Derry. And I'm sorry, but it's not a special place, right? It's a nice place. But the laws of equality and laws of discrimination and laws of civil rights and laws that people in that city fought for in the 60s should still apply today. And just because somebody who's young and wants to engage in the future in the armed forces or find out about it, they shouldn't be discriminated against. Section 75 should apply to them. They shouldn't have somebody in elected office in the Guildhall in Londonderry say, I'm sorry, because you're either a unionist or you're pro-Britain or you want to join the British Armed Forces, you can't pursue that opportunity. That's anti-civil rights, right, from the city of civil rights. So I get quite frustrated the way there seems to be this special, you have to understand. No, I don't. These universal human rights obligations and the commitment that we have not to discriminate against one another are really important. So I would say that. I would also say that we do engage with people, and the question earlier about faith, you know, we are a pro-life party, unashamed pro-life party. There are many examples of priests standing up on during the Mass and indicating to people that the DUP is a party that stands up for those moral values, conservative values that they can support. Don't apologise for that either. I've met with the Archbishop of Armagh, the Roman Catholic one, as well as the Archbishop of Armagh, the Church of Ireland, but I've met with the Archbishop Eamon and a number of his bishops talking about areas of mutual interest that we do agree on, and talking about things that, because they look around them and they look at their, and the Into is a sort of a notable exception, but it's very small. They look around them at their nationalist representatives and they say to their congregant members quite often, our parties don't support our position. And so they do encourage. Now I wouldn't overstate it, and I wouldn't suggest that there are tens of thousands of people that are in Mass on a Saturday and voting for the DUP on a Thursday. I'm not a fool. And that's what I said earlier, people go in, first decision, do you go to the polling station or not? Second decision, when you go, can you find somebody who most represents the things that interest you? And so our pro-life perspective is important to a lot of people who ordinarily wouldn't look our way. But we're one of the few parties in Northern Ireland left that take an interest in these issues. Is that fair? And thank you for the question, because it allowed me say a few things.
Yeah, go Daniel, nice.
So the Agriculture Minister every week will roll out and blame the DUP for blocking his agenda. He says he's got 5 or 6 different policies on the executive table, and each time he'll go into the media and will blame the DUP for blocking them. It strikes me that it's not just down to the individual policies, it's a wider issue of his approach to governing in the executive and to his own department. So I'm very interested to sort of from your perspective of why the DUP constantly blocking what he personally wants to get through, and do you think there is a wider issue with how he approaches policy and sort of governing with you and the other partners?
Well, I mentioned earlier about consensus in politics, right? And you should also have collegiality within the executive. So just because he is the Minister for Dara does not mean that he gets to have his say or way whenever he is one of 8 or 9 members of the executive. It doesn't work like that. That's not how it works. And he can sit and complain and moan about things being blocked, or he could sit down and talk about where you can find agreement. And he could do that with us, or he could do that with stakeholders who take an interest. And in fairness to him, because I know your wee gilet there, you must have got free from the Ulster Farmers Union. You know, in fairness to him, because there was, you take Lough Neagh for example, right? It started out with everybody blaming the farmers. It's all the farmers' fault. In fairness to him, he has pivoted and shifted to try and say, actually, that Northern Ireland Water is pumping sewage in there of thousands of tonnes continually, and the Department of Infrastructure doing nothing about it, and that 40% of ecological damage to Lough Neagh is a consequence of Northern Ireland Water not treating the sewage that they're pumping into the loch, is a thing. So in fairness to him, he's doing that, which I think is a better balance. But look, there's a whole host of basket case policies that come forward, and they're not going to get our agreement. That's just the way politics works. It's a multi-party coalition, but it doesn't operate on the basis that you get what you want. You have an agreed legislative programme, and you agree to bring forward policies that have the collective agreement of the executive. And if you don't, or if you won't, they won't pass. If you want them to pass, then talk about what the problem is and try to find a solution, or build a consensus around us. I mean, those are the options. But like literally, some of them even that we've been accused of blocking haven't even been brought to the executive. Genuinely. Like there's a genuine example in my head right now that he has said we have blocked, and yet my colleagues tell me it hasn't even been tabled.
Is it the most recent one?
It was about waste. Hasn't even been brought. So, look, this is the other side of course, is his electoral challenge is from the Greens coming back in North Down. That's where his electoral challenge lies. You know, there was a time whenever the Alliance Party were concerned about the growth of the Greens and the fear that, you know, there are other people in this world that may be even more enlightened than they are, and the Greens were doing well, and then they receded a bit, and they had 2 MLAs that they lost in South Belfast and North Down. There's a good chance of the Green seat coming back in North Down. That's why he gets quite concerned, and that's why he won't engage in compromise, in my view.
Yeah, yourself.
You've mentioned human rights a few times now, so as a women's rights activist, why should I vote for the DUP, a party that consistently votes against proper access to women's health and abortion?
So I don't see the world entirely the same way you do. Right? I don't see abortion as healthcare. I don't see ending life as healthcare. Unless there is a health consequence. I don't believe in abortion being used as a contraceptive. I don't believe abortion is a positive thing. I can also accept that there are many people who have had to avail of that in the most extraordinary personal circumstances. And I also know that there are some who have had to avail of abortion to protect their own life, right? Which was always permitted under the law. So look, I think the best thing for me to say to you is that we probably don't see the world the same. I don't accept it as a health care issue. I don't think that we should be casual. Right? And as on a broader policy point, I don't believe we should be casual about protecting life, though I recognise that there have been and will continue to be situations where it is the only course of action. I don't see it as that. And I don't see myself as a denier of human rights, because I don't believe that the removal of life in that circumstance is in any way a positive thing, unless it is required to protect life. That's my view. And I understand that you probably come from a different perspective. So I'm not going to lecture you on that. I'm not going to fall out with you on it either. But I don't see it the same way you do.
Yeah, no, that's completely okay. So you would even agree that in instances that a woman's life would be saved with an abortion, would you disagree that that's healthcare, even if a woman's life would be saved through having that life-saving treatment?
So I think I've been genuine in that. I understand why that happens. Right? And it does happen, and it always did happen. Even before votes in the Assembly and people, like the ability for doctors to terminate in a situation to protect life was an important thing that they did. Right? But I do not believe in a casual approach to life. And I don't believe that anybody has the right to remove life. So I don't see it as a human right. And I don't believe that often in this context people consider that there are two lives in the situation, not just one.
Just to the left there, yeah, yourself. Yeah.
I just want to know what you, if the DP weren't, what the DP would do for, say, like young mothers who then have had that child and they maybe don't have the resources to financially support that child, or the emotional bandwidth that they have, like mental health issues, or maybe a lack of a support network, what the DP would do to support those young mothers.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you follow Parliament closely, but this was one of the issues around two-child limit, for example. That was a policy brought forward by the Conservative government that Labour retained. So there was no financial resource if somebody had a third child, for example, even in a situation where it could have arisen from sexual assault, rape. So that was removed last week. The DUP have always supported the removal of that policy. I mean, we support family, we support family policies. That also means that we support individuals. You know, family doesn't need to be nuclear nowadays. If a young mother, if a young girl ends up pregnant, it doesn't matter to me that she's not married, in the sense that if she needs support, she should get support from wider community, wider family. We could talk about the rights and wrongs of all of that another day, you know, about her own personal situation. But if somebody finds themselves in that position where they have a pregnancy and they struggle, then there is an importance from society, family, community and state to support an individual with that on resource terms, housing terms, support for the mother and for the child.
Thank you.
And the demonstration of the two-child cap limit is one aspect. We can show it, the introduction of free childcare in Northern Ireland and support for families who are using private childcare facilities, hugely important because we want to support families, we want to support children being brought up in a nurturing environment.
I'll just go for one more. I think there was a hand at the back, yeah, in the green. Was there?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Rupert Lowe has set up his new party, Restore Britain, and he has quite a few interesting ideas, you know, like on animal welfare, for example, banning kosher and halal slaughter. So I was just wondering generally, what do you think of Rupert Lowe? Will there be any cooperation between DUP and Rupert Lowe on similar matters?
Can I ask you, what did you say, banning what?
Oh, you know, he's interested in banning halal and kosher slaughter on animal welfare grounds. That's just one example, but I'm just interested generally what you think of Rupert Rupert Lowe that they'll be incorporated?
He sits behind us in Westminster. He can be good crack. I wouldn't vote for him. I don't live in Great Yarmouth. I'll never have the opportunity to vote for him. From somebody like me who talks about freedom of religion and belief, very hard for me to say I believe in freedom of religion and belief. And first of all, to assume that that only extends to Christianity. It doesn't. I believe in the freedom of others to believe differently as well. And if that also means about how food is dealt with and how animals are slaughtered, then I've got to respect that too. I mean, one of my colleagues is in Baghdad right now, standing up for persecution of Christians. He does that in Westminster as the chair of the Freedom of Religion APPG, but it's not just Christians. And you know, when you talk about halal and slaughter of other animals, I mean, Rupert Lowe talking about the inappropriate slaughter or the cruelty associated with slaughter of animals. This is the man that shot his own dog about 3 months ago and had his rifles taken off him by the police for shooting his own dog. And he said he did it out of an act of compassion, and others will take a different view on that. But like, he's good crack. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think his party's going to do particularly well, right? If he wanted to keep going, he would have stayed in Reform. I don't think he'll do particularly well, but you should come over and meet him sometime. There was a guy in green now, if he was the last one. Do you want to ask a question?
There's a saying that demographics is destiny. What do you think of the long-term demographics of Northern Ireland? Unionists tend to have less kids and they're aging more quickly. Do you think unionism is long-term viable?
So this is something that has been, families are getting smaller. Right? It's not just people that, you know, develop constitutional views about unionism that are having smaller families. Like, people are having smaller families in society more generally. We have been told that demographics are changing for 40 years, and I've indicated to you that in the last almost 30, the shift hasn't happened within the collective nationalist politics. 39% 1998 and 39% today. And you can dress it up in many ways. There are people who are born into nationalist families that support being in the union. There are people who are born into families that have mixed marriages or cross-community marriages, and they support being in the union. They mightn't vote for unionist parties, by the way, but they support being in the union. Similarly, you'll find somebody from unionist politics who wants to be in the other category or whatever, right? So if the question is perceived on that birth rates are slower within unionism, that's been said for a long time, and it hasn't made a material impact on the demographics outworkings in electoral politics, which is the only sure measure we can see.
And a cool question about immigration. From your experience, do immigrants tend to be more unionist inclined or more nationalist inclined?
So, China, India, Hong Kong, Commonwealth countries, Africa, they're coming to Northern Ireland because they believe in the UK. Right? They want a British passport. They want to be a part of the United Kingdom. That's the experience that I have. Those are the people that I see in my office. I mean, we do a lot of immigration work in the office, and that's what you get. Accession countries who have European Union citizenship and don't care for British citizenship and don't need it because they came here as part of a wider European movement system. I'm not sure they're that fussed.
Thank you.
That's true.
Thank you, Gavin, for your important contributions that you've made to our society tonight, for developing a discussion on the past, present and future of Northern Ireland, for aiding in our understanding of unionism and for encouraging democratic participation, discussion, understanding and participation, our very own DUP. So for your contributions to our society, Gavin, and as a token of appreciation, I would like to award you with our Lyrific pin badge. Thank you very much. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone who has been involved in this amazing event, for you all as an audience for taking part, for our wonderful events officer James Turish, for Chris Kelly allowing us the use of the McMordie Hall, for our brilliant interviewer Claire Dickson HLM, and finally once again for Gavin Robinson. Thank you very much. I'm proud to call this LitTalk adjourned.
Oh, no.